An unthinking gesture in a crowded square triggers a wave of unexpected consequences. As a bond is tested by fear, a long-buried secret begins to surface. The late afternoon sun cast dancing shadows on the pavement of Washington Square Park in New York City. The typical buzz of a spring day filled the air. Children running, birds singing in the canopies of century-old trees, and the unmistakable aroma of coffee wafting from nearby food carts. Amidst this urban symphony, Lily, an 8-year-old girl, walked with light and confident steps, guided by Scout, her faithful Labrador companion. The connection between Lily and Scout caught the attention of everyone who saw them pass. The dog's golden coat gleamed under the light filtered through the trees, and his attentive eyes constantly scanned the environment, ensuring that his small protege could safely explore the world. Sarah, Lily's mother, observed the scene with a smile on her lips, amazed at the transformation Scout had brought to her daughter's life. "Mum, can you smell that popcorn?" Lily asked, her face lighting up with a smile. "Scout can smell it too. He always gets more excited when we pass by Mr. Johnson's cart." Sarah laughed softly. "Yes, honey. Would you like us to buy a bag?" Before Lily could answer, a deafening roar shattered the tranquility of the park. The sound of a powerful motorcycle approaching at high speed caused several passers-by to turn, with looks of disapproval. Scout, instantly alert, positioned himself protectively beside Lily, who gripped his harness more tightly. The motorcycle stopped a few meters away from them, and from it descended Richard Blackwell, a man who carried an aura of arrogance as palpable as the Italian suit he wore. His polished shoes touched the ground of the park, as if the place were unworthy of his presence, and his gaze swept the environment with barely disguised disdain. "Sir, motorcycles aren't allowed in the park." An elderly lady selling handicrafts tried to warn him, her voice trembling slightly. Richard didn't even deign to look at her, his eyes, however, fixed on Scout. Something in the noble posture of the dog, in the way he stood firm beside Lily, provoked an inexplicable irritation in him. It was as if the mere existence of that scene, a blind girl and her guide dog, personally offended him. Without anyone being able to predict, Richard veered his path towards the two. Sarah, who was a few steps away, realized his intentions too late. In a sudden and cruel movement, he kicked Scout, causing a dull sound that seemed to echo throughout the park. Time seemed to freeze. Scout, even after the impact, remained firmly at Lily's side. Lily felt the tension in the animal's body, but didn't fully understand what had happened. Sarah ran towards her daughter, her heart beating erratically. What Richard didn't notice, in his moment of inexplicable cruelty, was Jessica, a young woman sitting on one of the park benches who had just turned on her cell phone to record a video for her blog about life in New York City. Her hands were shaking, but the camera captured every second of the incident. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Sarah hugged Lily while checking Scout with concern. The Labrador remained stoic, but it was possible to notice a subtle tremor in his paws. Richard had already walked away, moving as if nothing had happened, when the first murmurs of indignation began to spread through the park. Jessica, still in shock, looked at her cell phone screen where the images of gratuitous violence had been recorded. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching. Gus from Will Continue. Jessica sat in her apartment that night, her hands still trembling as she edited the video. She had captured not only the moment of the aggression, but also Richard Blackwell's arrogant expression before and after the incident. As a budding journalist and content creator, she knew the weight those images carried. "I can't let this slide," she murmured to herself as she added an explanatory caption to the video. She identified Richard Blackwell, the businessman known for his luxurious enterprises in the city, and described the context of the situation. After a few hours of reflection, she published the content on her social media. The repercussion was instant and overwhelming. Within minutes, the video began to be shared on different platforms. Outraged comments multiplied, and soon the hashtags Justice for Scout and Richard Blackwell Coward began to gain traction on social media. The next day, Richard woke up to a media storm he hadn't expected. His phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from his press office trying to control the damage. Sitting in his office on the top floor of one of the most luxurious buildings in New York City, he observed the city through the panoramic windows, still not understanding the magnitude of the problem. "Mr. Blackwell, we need to issue an official statement immediately," insisted Amanda, his press officer, as she nervously scrolled through her tablet. "The video has already surpassed 1 million views, and several partner companies are contacting us concerned about the association of their brands with your name." Richard made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "It's just a dog, for God's sake. Don't people have anything better to do? It's not just a dog, sir. It's a guide dog, and the girl is a blind child. The story is touching people in a way we can't ignore." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Sarah was taking Scout to a veterinary clinic. The Labrador, who had always been an example of confidence and serenity, now showed signs of nervousness when leaving the house. Dr. Thompson, a veterinarian specialized in assistance dogs, examined the animal with concern. "Physically, the injuries are minor," explained the veterinarian, gently stroking Scout's head. "But I'm worried about the emotional impact. Guide dogs are trained to remain calm in any situation, but a trauma like this can affect their confidence and compromise their work." Sarah felt her heart tighten. "And what can we do, doctor?" "We'll need a few behavioral rehabilitation sessions. The most important thing now is to restore his confidence." "How is Lily?" "She still doesn't fully understand what happened, but she notices that Scout is different, more hesitant. This morning, when we tried to take our usual walk, he trembled when he heard a motorcycle passing by." In the Blackwell mansion, Rachel, Richard's sister, watched the video for the 10th time, feeling a mixture of shame and sadness. Something in her brother's behavior deeply bothered her, bringing to the surface memories that she had tried to bury for years. Memories of Max, the dog Richard had in childhood, and whose fate she kept as a painful secret. The city was buzzing with the story. Journalists began to investigate Richard Blackwell's past, uncovering other episodes of arrogance and abuse of power that had been conveniently forgotten. Animal protection groups organized protests in front of Blackwell Group. Companies and old stories of mistreated employees began to come to light. Jessica, now at the center of a storm she herself had initiated, received hundreds of messages. Some of support, others with veiled threats, probably from people connected to Richard. But she remained firm in her decision to expose the truth, especially after receiving a special message from Sarah, thanking her for giving voice to her indignation. Richard Blackwell's office, once a symbol of power and prestige, now seemed suffocating. The glass walls that offered a privileged view of New York City could no longer hide the reality unfolding outside. On the imported mahogany desk, newspaper. Headlines screamed accusations. "Businessman assaults blind child's guide dog. Blackwell Empire under scrutiny after act of cruelty." Amanda, the press officer, entered the room with another pile of reports. "We lost 3 important contracts this morning. The Starlight Hotel chain cancelled the partnership, and the investors in the new commercial tower are threatening to withdraw their capital." Richard ran his hands over his face, feeling the weight of each word. For the first time in years, money didn't seem enough to solve his problems. "How long until this blows over? We've already made donations to animal protection institutions. Sent clarification note." "Mr. Blackwell," Amanda interrupted, her voice carrying an unusual seriousness. "This isn't just about public relations. People are connecting the dots. Former employees are talking to the press, sharing stories about your behavior over the years." The phone rang, and Rachel's name flashed on the screen. Richard hesitated before answering, knowing his sister wouldn't. "Call without an important reason. Rach, it's not a good time. We need to talk, Richard, about Max." The name hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. Long repressed images invaded his mind. A chocolate puppy running through the mansion's garden, joyful barks echoing through the corridors, and then silence. That was 20 years ago, Rachel. What does Max have to do with anything? It has everything to do with it, and you know it. Come have dinner at my place tonight. It's time you knew the truth. At the veterinary clinic, Lily sat on the floor next to Scout, her small hands caressing the soft fur of her friend, while Dr. Thompson observed the interaction. The Labrador, still hesitant, remained close to the girl, but his alert eyes examined every movement around them. "I spoke with some colleagues who specialize in guide dogs," Dr. Thompson explained to Sarah. "Scout's case is delicate. The trauma wasn't just physical. Guide dogs are trained to trust humans completely, and that trust was broken violently." Lily, even without fully understanding the adult's conversation, felt the change in her companion. "Is Scout sad, Mom? He hardly plays with me in the garden anymore." Sarah held back the tears that threatened to fall. "He just needs a little time to feel safe again, my love. Like that day when I fell on the playground and was afraid to use the swing, but then you helped me not to be scared anymore." The simplicity of the comparison made Sarah smile. "Exactly like that, dear. Sometimes we need help to overcome our fears." Meanwhile, Jessica faced her own battles. Her blog, previously focused on everyday stories of New York City, now received thousands of hits. Journalists from major outlets sought her out for interviews, wanting to know more about the day of the incident. "I never imagined that a video could cause such a commotion," she commented to her friend Julia, while organizing the messages that kept coming in. "But the most impressive thing is the stories that people are sharing. It seems that Richard Blackwell has a history of treating people as if they were disposable. And are you prepared for the consequences? I read that his family has a lot of influence in the city." Jessica took a deep breath, remembering Lily's frightened look and Scout's protective posture. "Some stories need to be told, Jules, no matter who the villain is." Rachel's house preserved the traditional architecture of old New York residences, with its exposed bricks and well-tended garden. That night, as the sun set over the city, Richard parked his imported car in the driveway, feeling an uneasiness he couldn't explain. The table was set for two, with the china set that had belonged to their mother. Rachel had always been the guardian of family memories, while Richard preferred to focus on the future, on his achievements and acquisitions. "Do you remember the day they brought Max?" Rachel began, serving the red wine she knew was her brother's favorite. "Mom had just found out she was sick, and Dad thought a dog could help us deal with everything." Richard swirled the wine in his glass, avoiding his sister's gaze. "Rach, if you called me here for a nostalgic trip, Max didn't run away, Richard." The phrase hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. "Dad took him away because you couldn't handle him. After Mom passed, you started treating Max as if he was to blame for not being able to fix our family." Richard's hands tightened around the glass. "What are you saying?" "Max was rescued by an organization that trains guide dogs. He had the perfect temperament, patient, intelligent, dedicated. He spent years helping an elderly lady who had lost her vision. He found his purpose, Richard, even after all the contempt he received." Rachel's words hit Richard like successive waves, bringing to the surface memories he had tried to bury. He remembered the nights he kicked Max out of his room, the moments he ignored his pleas for affection, the way the dog still looked at him with devotion. "Why did you never tell me this before?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it. But now seeing you repeat the same pattern of contempt with that guide dog in the park, Richard, you need to understand that it's not the animals or the people you despise. It's something inside yourself." On the other side of the city, Lily was preparing for bed, but not without her special routine with Scout. Every night, she told stories to the dog, recalling their adventures together. "Remember the day we discovered that new ice cream shop, Scout? You were so smart you helped me not to bump into any tables, and when it rained last week, you found the driest path for us to walk on." Sarah, standing at the bedroom door, observed the scene with a heavy heart. Scout, lying next to Lily's bed, kept his ears attentive to every word from the girl, and his eyes, once so frightened, began to show signs of their old serenity. At the veterinary clinic, Dr. Thompson analyzed Scout's latest exams, preparing a detailed report on his recovery. "It's impressive how the bond with Lily is helping," he commented to his assistant. "Most dogs would take much longer to start recovering from a trauma like this." Sarah's cell phone vibrated with a message from Jessica. "We need to talk. I discovered something about Richard Blackwell that could change everything." Meanwhile, in the Blackwell mansion, Richard remained awake, rummaging through old boxes he hadn't opened in years. At the bottom of one, he found a red collar, faded by time. His fingers traced the letters engraved on the leather. Max. Rachel's words echoed in his mind, mixing with the newspaper headlines and comments on social media. For the first time, in a long time, Richard Blackwell, the feared and respected businessman, allowed himself to feel the weight of his own actions. The coffee shop in downtown New York was almost empty at that early hour. Jessica arrived first, choosing a discreet table at the back of the establishment. Her fingers drummed nervously on the cup as she waited for Sarah. The discovery she had made the night before still left her uneasy. Sarah arrived minutes later, her tired eyes betraying sleepless nights. "Sorry I'm late. Lily didn't want to go to school today. It's getting harder to convince her to go out without Scout. How is he doing?" "He's slowly getting better. Dr. Thompson says the bond with Lily is making all the difference." Sarah paused, studying Jessica's tense expression. "But you didn't call me here to talk about Scout, did you?" Jessica opened her laptop, turning the screen so Sarah could see. "I spent the night researching the Blackwell family. I found records of an organization called New Horizons that existed 20 years ago. They specialized in guide dog training." "And what does that have to do with Richard?" "The organization received a chocolate Labrador named Max. In the old photos I found..." Jessica slid her finger across the screen, enlarging a time-yellowed image. "This is Richard Blackwell, younger, with Max." Sarah leaned in to get a better look at the photo. The contrast between the Richard in the image, a young man with a distant expression next to a dog looking at him with adoration, and the man who had assaulted Scout, was disturbing. "There's more," Jessica continued. "New Horizons closed abruptly after receiving a mysterious donation. A sum large enough for all the dogs to be relocated to other training centers. The donation came from a shell company, but I managed to trace it. It was linked to the Blackwell family." In Dr. Thompson's office, Lily was participating in another therapy session with Scout. The veterinarian had developed special exercises to help the dog regain his confidence. That day, they were practicing with recorded sounds of motorcycles and cars. "Very good, Scout," Lily applauded each time the dog remained calm upon hearing the noises. "You're the bravest dog in the world." Dr. Thompson watched attentively, taking notes. Lily's presence had a notable effect on Scout. When he was with her, his stress signals decreased considerably. It was as if the desire to protect her was greater than his own fear. "You know, Lily," said the veterinarian, approaching, "Scout is trying very hard for you. He understands that you need him. I need to try hard for him too, right? Like when he helps me cross the street even when there's a lot of noise." The simplicity of Lily's observation touched the veterinarian's heart. Exactly. It's a partnership. Meanwhile, in the Blackwell mansion, Richard had spent the entire morning reviewing old photographs and documents. Max's collar rested on his desk, a silent reminder of his past choices. His secretary interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Blackwell, Miss Rachel is on the phone." "She says it's urgent," Richard answered, still distracted by the memories consuming him. His sister's voice sounded tense. "I just received an interesting call. Remember the lady who got Max after he was trained as a guide dog? What about her?" "She's still alive, Richard, and she wants to talk to you." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard felt the weight of 2 decades of regret compress his chest. The lady who had given Max the home and purpose he hadn't been able to offer wanted to see him. "Where is she?" "At St. Francis Nursing Home, that retirement home in the Upper East Side. Her name is Mrs. Eleanor." Rachel paused. "She said Max was the best gift she ever received, that he helped her rediscover the world after she lost her vision." The words hit Richard like precise arrows. The image of Lily and Scout returned to his mind, and for the first time he began to truly understand the dimension of what he had done in the park that day. St. Francis Nursing Home was an old mansion, adapted to serve as a residence for the elderly. Its well-tended gardens and preserved architecture contrasted with the aggressive modernity of Richard Blackwell's enterprises. Standing in front of the gate, he hesitated, Max's red collar weighing in his pocket like an anchor. The receptionist led him through corridors illuminated by natural light, entering through large windows. In the solarium, an elderly lady with white hair and elegant posture was sitting in an armchair, her hands resting on a cane. "Mrs. Eleanor," the receptionist announced, "Mr. Blackwell is here." "Ah, Max's boy." Her voice was soft but firm. "You can come closer, Richard. Your sister told me about the incident in the park." Richard sat in the chair next to her, observing how her eyes, although unable to see him, seemed to look through his soul. "How did you know it was me?" "Max had an album of your photos. I couldn't see them, of course, but my daughter would describe them to me. He kept those memories until his last day." The mention of Max's last days made Richard swallow hard. I didn't know he had stayed with you for so long. 15 wonderful years. He taught me that losing my sight didn't mean losing my life. Every step I took after going blind was with him by my side." Mrs. Eleanor leaned slightly forward. "But that's not why I asked you to come." At the veterinary clinic, Lily and Scout were advancing in their exercises. Dr. Thompson had created a small circuit in the garden with different obstacles and sounds. It was an important test to assess whether Scout was regaining his ability to guide safely. "Let's go, buddy," Lily encouraged, holding the harness firmly. "Show the doctor how smart you are." Scout guided Lily carefully between the cones, his ears attentive to every sound. When the recorded noise of a motorcycle echoed through the speakers, he hesitated for a moment, but Lily's gentle touch on his fur calmed him. Together they completed the course without errors. "Impressive," Dr. Thompson commented, taking notes. "The synchrony between you is getting stronger and stronger." Sarah, who was observing everything closely, couldn't hold back her tears. It was the first time since the incident that she saw Scout acting with the same confidence as before. Back at St. Francis Nursing Home, Mrs. Eleanor continued her conversation with Richard. "Do you know why guide dogs are so special? It's not just the training. It's because they choose to trust humans even when we don't deserve that trust." Richard felt the weight of her words. How could Max trust someone after what I did? "Because he saw something in you that you couldn't see yourself, just like that Labrador in the park saw something in the girl he was guiding." Mrs. Eleanor paused. "The question is, what are you going to do now that your eyes have started to open?" In Richard's pocket, his cell phone vibrated. It was Amanda, his press officer, probably with more news about the crisis that had settled in his business. But for the first time in weeks, the numbers in his bank accounts and the value of his stocks seemed insignificant. "I want to make things right," he said, surprised by the sincerity in his own voice. "But I don't know where to start." "Start at the beginning," Mrs. Eleanor smiled, extending her hand to touch Richard's arm. "Acknowledge your mistakes, not because of the cameras or social media, but for yourself, and then do something that really matters." At that moment, Jessica was updating her blog with the discoveries about Richard's past and Max's story. Her hands hesitated over the keyboard. The story that had begun as a denunciation of cruelty was transforming into something deeper, a narrative about redemption and second chances. "Maybe," she murmured to herself, "some stories need to be told not to condemn, but to heal." Amanda entered Richard's office carrying another pile of negative reports, but found her boss different. Instead of the usual defensive posture, he was concentrated on his laptop, researching something with an intensity she hadn't seen in years. "How much does it cost to train a guide dog?" he asked, without taking his eyes off the screen. "Excuse me?" Amanda hesitated, confused by the sudden change of subject. "The complete training from puppy to certification. I need these numbers for a project." Richard finally looked at her. "And I want you to contact all the guide dog training institutions in the country. We need to know the current capacity and the unmet demand." "Mr. Blackwell, with all due respect, I don't think this is the time to—" "It's exactly the time, Amanda." He stood up, walking to the window. "Remember that land we bought in Central Park South? The one that was reserved for the new shopping mall? The $300 million project? Of course I remember. Cancel everything. We're going to use the space for something different." Richard turned. To her, his eyes shining with a new determination. I'm going to create the Max Foundation. At the veterinary clinic, Lily and Scout were celebrating another achievement. The Labrador had completed a complex circuit on the street, remaining calm even when a real motorcycle passed by them. "Did you see that, Mum?" Lily asked excitedly, hugging Scout. "He didn't even tremble." Dr. Thompson was making his notes with a smile on his face. "His recovery is exceeding all expectations. The bond between you two is truly extraordinary." Sarah observed the scene with tears in her eyes when her cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Jessica. "You need to see this. Richard Blackwell just announced something incredible." In the conference room of the Blackwell Group, Rachel listened to her brother present his new project with a mixture of pride and surprise. The company executives, initially skeptical, began to get involved with the idea as Richard detailed his plans. "The Max Foundation won't just be a training center," he explained, projecting the plans for the project. "It will be a complete complex, with a specialized veterinary hospital, an accessibility research center, and a shelter program for rescued dogs with potential to become guide dogs." "And what about the investment?" one of the directors questioned. "I'm going to sell my private jet and 3 of my vacation homes," Richard responded simply, causing astonishment in the room. "This project is more important than any personal luxury." Rachel observed the reactions around her. Some executives whispered among themselves, others were furiously taking notes. But what caught her attention most was the transformation in her brother. For the first time in years, she saw in him traces of the boy who had once played with Max in the house garden. On Jessica's blog, now transformed into a portal dedicated to stories of overcoming and inclusion, updates about the Max Foundation were the most anticipated. Her latest post about the upcoming graduation of the first class of guide dogs had gone viral on social networks. "The most impressive thing," she wrote in her analysis, "is not the numbers or the physical structures, but the small transformations that happen daily. Like when I saw Richard Blackwell sitting on the floor of the training center, completely absorbed in playing with the puppies, or when I witnessed Lily teaching a group of executives about the importance of empathy." Mrs. Eleanor, who had become a constant presence at the foundation, liked to sit in the sensory garden, a space specially designed with different textures and aromas. There she received families seeking guidance and shared her experiences with Max. "Each guide dog," she used to say, "carries with it the power to transform not only the life of the person who receives it, but of everyone who crosses its path." On a particularly pleasant afternoon, while observing Luna in her final training, Richard received a message on his cell phone. It was a photo sent by Sarah. Lily had fallen asleep on the reception couch, with Scout vigilant by her side. On her lap rested a braille book she was using to create stories for the Foundation's new dogs. The graduation ceremony for the first class of guide dogs from the Max Foundation transformed into an event that mobilized all of New York City. The space, now fully built and in full operation, was decorated with blue and gold ribbons, colors personally chosen by Lily. "The blue ribbons are the color of the sky that the dogs help us imagine," she explained to Richard as she helped with the preparations. "And the gold ones are like their hearts, bright and valuable." Among the graduates, Luna stood out with her shiny black coat and elegant posture. Beside her, Professor Michael, her future companion, couldn't contain his emotion. His fingers, accustomed to gliding over piano keys, now knew every inch of the dog's fur that would change his life. "It's incredible how she already knows my rhythm," he commented to Dr. Thompson. "When I play piano in the adaptation sessions, she lies down exactly where the sound reverberates the strongest." The ceremony began with a special presentation. Lily and Scout demonstrated to the audience what a perfect partnership between a person and their guide dog looked like. The ease with which they moved together drew emotional applause from those present. "A year ago," Sarah narrated into the microphone as her daughter and Scout did the presentation, "I feared my daughter would lose her independence. Today I see that she has gained much more than that. She's gained an entire family." Richard, seated between Rachel and Mrs. Eleanor, felt every word resonate in his chest. The arrogant businessman who had once kicked a guide dog in a public park could now hardly believe the journey that had brought him here. "Max always knew," Mrs. Eleanor whispered, as if reading his thoughts. Dogs have this gift of seeing the best in us, even when it's deeply hidden. The awarding of certifications was an especially touching moment. Each dog, accompanied by its new human companion, received not only the official documents, but also a special medal with the inscription New Horizons, a tribute to the organization that had transformed Max's life. Jessica, who was documenting everything for her portal, captured the moment when Luna led Professor Michael to the piano prepared on the stage. The musician, after receiving his certificate, gifted everyone with an original composition called Symphony of Guided Steps. Music, he explained, is like the trust between a guide dog and its companion. Each note needs the other to create something greater than themselves. As the soft melody filled the environment, Richard felt a small hand hold his. Lily had quietly approached, guided by Scout. "Uncle Richard," she whispered, using the affectionate nickname she had adopted in their story sessions, "I think Max is listening to this music up in heaven." The simple words of the girl brought tears to Richard's eyes. Rachel, noticing her brother's emotion, took his other hand, creating a silent chain of affection. At the end of the ceremony, as families were beginning to say goodbye, Dr. Thompson approached with a surprise. In his hands, he carried a plaque that would be installed at the entrance of the foundation. "In honor of all the dogs who teach us daily the meaning of unconditional love," he read aloud, especially to Max, who without knowing it planted the seed of this transformation. The plaque, made of bronze and with inscriptions also in Braille, had the image of a chocolate Labrador guiding a person, an artistic representation of Max with Mrs. Eleanor. Below, a simple but profound phrase, "Each guided step is a lesson in trust." The success of the first class of the Max Foundation echoed far beyond the limits of New York City. On a spring morning, as the cherry blossoms bloomed in the garden, Richard was receiving representatives from 3 different states, all interested in replicating the Foundation's model in their regions. "The differential isn't just in the structure," he explained, leading the group through the complex. "It's in the way we integrate families into the process from the beginning." In the training center, a scene caught the visitors' attention. Professor Michael was giving a music lesson to a group of blind children, with Luna lying serenely by his side. The piano had become a constant presence in the Foundation, its melodies serving as therapy for both the dogs and the people. "Music helps us create connections," Michael explained to his small students, "just as our guide dogs help us create bridges with the world." Lily, who now officially participated in the program as a junior consultant, had her own storytelling classes. Her narratives, always involving dogs and their human companions, helped families better understand the adaptation process. "Did you know that each dog has its own personality?" she explained to a group of future handlers. "Scout, for example, always stops to smell the flowers in the garden before guiding me to school. Professor Michael's Luna loves when he plays Beethoven, but gets restless with Mozart." Sarah, observing her daughter with pride, was talking with Rachel about expanding the Foundation's programs. It's amazing how children open up when they hear Lily speak. She has a special gift for making people understand that being different doesn't mean being less capable. "She changed, Richard," Rachel responded, her gaze finding her brother across the garden. "I've never seen him so at peace with himself." Indeed, Richard had transformed in a way that surprised even those who had known him for years. The businessman, who once measured success only by numbers in spreadsheets, now found his fulfillment in small moments. In a child's smile upon meeting their guide dog for the first time, in the sigh of relief from parents who finally saw their children gaining independence. In his new project, a partnership with public universities, the Foundation was beginning to develop assistive technologies that complemented the work of guide dogs. Professor Michael was at the forefront of research on how music could aid in animal training. "It's a universal language," he explained during a meeting. "Dogs respond to vibrations, to changes in rhythm. We're discovering musical patterns that can help in the adaptation process." Jessica, who continued documenting the evolution of the Foundation, had transformed her blog into a reference portal on accessibility and inclusion. Her reports now went beyond the story of Richard and Scout, telling the multiple narratives of transformation that were born there. "Sometimes I find myself thinking," she wrote in her latest article, "how a moment of darkness can give rise to so much light. What began with an act of cruelty has transformed into a movement of love and renewal." On a quiet afternoon while supervising the training of new puppies, Richard received an unexpected visit. It was the old caretaker of the mansion where Max had lived his first years. "I came to bring this," the man said, handing him an old box. "I found it stored in the attic of the house. These are some toys that Max used to hide, and some photos too." Among the items, Richard found a red ball, worn by time and play. He instantly remembered how Max used to carry it everywhere, always trying to convince him to play. "He never gave up on you," the caretaker commented softly. "Even on the days when you ignored him, he always left the ball near your door." At that moment, observing the new puppies playing in the garden, Richard understood that the Max Foundation was more than a redemption project. It was the continuation of a love story that had begun long ago with a chocolate Labrador who had never lost hope in his hardened heart. The first anniversary of the Max Foundation was approaching, and with it came deep reflections for all involved. The date chosen for the celebration couldn't be more significant. The same day that, a year before, a video had gone viral and forever changed the course of many lives. On the eve of the event, Lily had a special idea. During her weekly story sessions with Richard, she had kept every moment, every transformation, every small victory in her Braille diary. "Uncle Richard," she called, as they were having their traditional hot chocolate, "can I read something I wrote?" Her small fingers glided over the raised dots, translating into words what her heart had recorded. "Once upon a time, there was a man who was afraid to love. He built walls so high around himself that he forgot what it was like to feel the sun. But then one day a chocolate dog named Max planted a seed in his heart." Lily's story, simple and profound, perfectly captured the journey they had shared. Richard felt tears come to his eyes as she continued reading, describing how Scout, even after being hurt, had helped water that seed planted by Max. "Do you think we can read this tomorrow at the party?" she asked after finishing. "Professor Michael said he can provide piano accompaniment." On the day of the celebration, the Foundation's complex was decorated with photos that told its story. From the old image of Max to the most recent records of the graduated dogs, each image narrated a chapter of this extraordinary transformation. Mrs. Eleanor, who now coordinated the family welcoming program, was seated in her place of honor. Her experienced hands held Max's photo album, now enriched with new stories from the Foundation. "Each page of this album," she said to a young mother waiting for a guide dog for her son, "is a reminder that love has the power to transcend any obstacle." The celebration began with a special presentation. Professor Michael at the piano, accompanied by Luna, began to play a soft melody. Lily, with Scout by her side, began reading her story. Her clear and confident voice echoed through the space, touching every heart present. Jessica, recording the moment, noticed how Richard, seated between Rachel and Sarah, finally seemed at peace. The man who had once been known for his arrogance now radiated a serenity that only comes when we find our true purpose. "The seed that Max planted," Lily continued reading, "grew and transformed into a huge tree, and from that tree many other seeds were born, which are being planted in hearts everywhere." As she read, images were projected showing the results of the first year. 50 dogs graduated, 3 new units under construction in other states, partnerships with international institutions, and most importantly, hundreds of lives transformed. "And the man who was afraid to love," Lily reached the end of her story, "discovered that his heart was never really closed. He just needed the help of some special friends to find the key." When she finished, an emotional silence took over the environment, broken only by the soft chords of Professor Michael's piano. Richard stood up, walking to Lily and Scout. In his hands, he carried something special, Max's red collar, now transformed into an honor symbol of the Foundation. "This collar," he announced, his voice choked with emotion, "belonged to the dog who taught me my first lesson about unconditional love. Today, it represents not only Max's memory, but the future we are building together, A gentle summer breeze blew through the gardens of the Max Foundation on a special afternoon. 2 years had passed since that moment in Washington Square Park that had changed so many lives. The complex, now fully established, pulsed with a vibrant energy of purpose and hope. Lily, now 10 years old, walked confidently through the corridors. She knew so well Scout guiding her steps with the same dedication as always. Her presence at the foundation had become an inspiration to everyone. The stories she created were now an official part of the training program, helping other dogs and their future companions build stronger bonds. "You know, Scout," she whispered to her faithful friend as they headed to the music room, "sometimes I think that day in the park wasn't an accident. It was destiny bringing us together for a special mission." In the music room, Professor Michael was teaching his class to a new group of children. Luna, always attentive by his side, wagged her tail to the rhythm of the melodies. The music therapy program he had developed had become an international reference in guide dog training. Richard observed everything from his new office, very different from that cold and impersonal environment of before. The walls, once decorated with diplomas and certificates of business success, now displayed photos of the graduated dogs and their families. In the center, in a special frame, the photo of Max next to Mrs. Eleanor smiled at everyone who entered. "The UN representatives just confirmed," Rachel announced, entering the room. "The Max Foundation has been chosen as a global model for inclusion and accessibility programs." Richard smiled, his gaze resting on Max's red collar that now rested in a glass dome on his desk. "It's not about recognition, Rachel. It's about continuing to plant seeds." In the sensory garden, Sarah coordinated a meeting between future handlers and their families. The space, carefully designed with different textures and aromas, had become a meeting point where stories of overcoming were born daily. Jessica, who continued documenting the Foundation's journey, had transformed her blog into a global movement. Her reports now inspired similar initiatives in different countries, showing how a moment of personal transformation could generate waves of change throughout the world. "The most impressive thing," she wrote in her latest article, "is not the numbers, although they are extraordinary. It's seeing how love can multiply when it finds fertile soil to grow." On that special afternoon, everyone gathered in the auditorium for a unique moment. Lily had prepared a surprise, a special presentation with all the guide dogs trained by the Foundation and their companions. Professor Michael at the piano, Luna by his side, began to play an original composition called Symphony of Guided Hearts. One by one, the pairs entered the stage. Each dog, each person carried their own story of overcoming and new beginnings. Scout led the group, his proud posture reflecting the long journey traveled since that afternoon in the park. 2 years ago, Lily began her speech, her clear and confident voice filling the space. "A moment of darkness brought us to the light. Today, we celebrate not only the stories we have already lived, but all the stories that are yet to come." Richard, seated next to Mrs. Eleanor, felt his heart overflow. The businessman who had once measured success in figures now measured it in smiles, in steps guided with confidence, in lives transformed by the unconditional love that only a dog can offer. "Max taught me," he whispered to Mrs. Eleanor, "that sometimes we need to get lost to find our true path." The lady smiled, her experienced hands holding the old photo album. "And Scout taught us that forgiveness is the greatest proof of love. That exists." As the soft music filled the environment, Lily concluded with words that touched every heart present. "Each step we take together is a new story being written. And in each story, a little bit of Max, a little bit of Scout, a little bit of all of us continues living and transforming the world." The sun was setting on the New York City horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold, the same color that Lily said was the color of dogs' hearts. At the entrance of the foundation, the bronze plaque shone with the last lights of the day. Max Foundation, where every step is guided by love. Dear listeners, we have just shared an extraordinary journey of transformation and unconditional love. To continue exploring equally touching stories that show the power of forgiveness and redemption, we have prepared a special playlist that you can find here on the left. If this narrative touched your heart, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Daily, we bring unique stories that celebrate the beauty of second chances and love in its most diverse forms. Share your thoughts in the comments and be part of this community that believes in the transformative power of love. Your story deserves to be heard too.